Committee will come to order. I want to thank everyone for being here, and good afternoon. A special thank you to all our witnesses who came here to share their experience and their expertise with us here this afternoon. We very much appreciate it. Small business cybersecurity has been a top priority for our committee throughout this Congress. In our previous hearings, we've heard stories from small business owners who have been the victims of cyber attacks. We've also heard dire warnings from cybersecurity experts about the new and varied cyber threats facing America's 28 million small businesses all across the country. There's no doubt that the information technology, or IT, revolution has provided small businesses with new tools and opportunities to compete in the global economy. However, we must be mindful that as small businesses use this technology, the risk of a foreign cyber attack has increased dramatically. According to a recent report by Verizon Enterprise, over 70% of cyber attacks occurred in businesses with fewer than 100 employees, so small businesses. As we have heard many times, even one cyber attack can be devastating for a small business, making prevention and protection absolutely critical. A 2014 survey from the National Small Business Association estimated the average cost of a cyber attack on a small business to be over $32,000, which is a huge hit for a small business. Our committee's efforts to spotlight these serious and growing threats have made it abundantly clear that the federal government needs to step up its game when it comes to protecting the cybersecurity of small businesses and individuals. Today's hearing will examine the increased threats posed by foreign actors to American small businesses in cyberspace. This is an important dimension of the cybersecurity threat that impacts both our national security and our economic security, and I believe it demands much more attention than it has received thus far. The FBI has already determined that foreign state actors pose a serious cyber threat to the telecommunications supply chain. It is also clear that many foreign nations are responsible for direct cyber attacks on the United States in an effort to steal intellectual property and sensitive personal information. The Office of the National Counterintelligence Executive released a report in 2011 stating that tens of billions of dollars in trade secrets, intellectual property, and technology are being stolen each year from computer systems in the federal government, from corporations, and from academic institutions. China and Russia were cited as the two largest participants in cyber espionage. In a report by our colleagues on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, U.S. businesses and cybersecurity experts have reported persistent attacks that could be traced back to China and were thought to be supported by the Chinese government. And studies from the Department of Defense have warned of the difficulties associated with defending against threats posed by foreign nations, stating, quote, "Means and opportunity are present throughout the supply chain and life cycle of software development," unquote. This is particularly troublesome for small businesses that not only rely on products from, but also engage in commerce with globalized telecommunications firms from countries like China. Small businesses play an indispensable role in providing the federal government with products and services. They are integral links in the government supply chain, but are often ill-equipped to combat against sophisticated foreign cyber attacks. This makes them a prime target for state-sponsored of cyber terrorism who wish to undermine America's commerce and security. I think we all look forward to hearing from our witnesses and their assessment of this threat, as well as their suggestions for how we may better guard against the cybersecurity that we're discussing here today. And I would ask unanimous consent that our colleague from North Carolina, Mr. Robert Pittenger, be permitted to sit on the dais today and also ask questions in the order that we would normally follow, but he'll be at the end of the list of members that were here when we started, of course. And I would now like to yield to the, without objection so ordered, and I would now like to yield to the ranking member, Ms. Velasquez, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the past 15 years, the Internet and associated technologies have changed the way business is conducted. The Internet allows businesses of all sizes and from any location to reach new and larger markets and provides opportunities to work more efficiently by using computer-based tools. It affords America's 23 million small businesses a unique opportunity to sell their products not only across the country but around the world. And while the Internet has fostered a tremendous degree of economic growth, it has also introduced profound security risks. Reports of massive data breaches have become commonplace, and the average cost of such breaches devastatingly high. Whether a business is thinking of adopting cloud computing or just using email and maintaining a website, cybersecurity should be a part of their plan. Theft of digital information has become the most commonly reported fraud, surpassing physical theft, and small businesses are the primary target. Just last year, 60% of all targeted attacks struck small and medium-sized entities. Among the worst threats to American businesses, particularly small firms, is cyber warfare performed by foreign entities. Not only are these cyber infiltrators accessing intellectual property and trade secrets, they are using the company's PCs to disguise attacks against other companies and the federal government. In fact, the Office of the National Counterintelligence Executive reported that tens of billions of dollars in trade secrets, IP, and technology are being stolen each year. These actions have costly implications for small businesses and their ability to operate. According to research, 74% of small and medium-sized businesses reported being affected by cyber attacks in 2011, with an average cost of $188,000 per incident and totaling over $2 million. Combating these attacks have led to the U.S. government issuing bans on certain foreign products and services, and also requiring small business contractors to meet demanding IT specifications. While these efforts are necessary, they prove confusing and costly to small businesses who are attempting to protect themselves and their customers from data breaches, stay globally competitive, and win federal contracts. Clearly, cybersecurity should be a priority to protect our national security and economy. Failure to do so leaves all of us at risk. As we move forward, comprehensive reform must balance a number of priorities, including being able to adapt to evolving technologies, preventing undue costs and regulations on small businesses, and protecting our sensitive information. During today's hearing, we will explore the critical issues facing small businesses that operate online and the resources they need to leverage innovative technologies. I look forward to hearing your recommendations to better educate and inform the small business community on cyber issues and how the federal government can facilitate a more robust and efficient cybersecurity environment. I also would like to thank all the witnesses for being here and providing your expertise and have a broad discussion on this issue. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back. And if committee members have opening statements prepared, I'd ask that they submit them for the record. And I'd now like to take just a moment to explain our timing lights here and how we operate. We're under the 5-minute rule. It's pretty simple. You all will get 5 minutes, and then we'll ask questions, and we'll limit ourselves to 5 minutes as well. The lighting system is to assist you. The green light will be on for about 4 minutes, and then the yellow light will come on to let you know you got about a minute to wrap up, and then the red light will come on, and we'd ask you to stop, not necessarily exactly at that point, but you know, within reason, try to stay within those times, if at all possible. And I'd now like to introduce our very distinguished panel here this afternoon. Our first witness will be Jamil Jaffer, Director, Homeland and National Law Program at George Mason School of Law in Arlington, Virginia. He also serves as Vice President for Strategy and Business Development in IronNet Cybersecurity. Prior to IronNet, Mr. Jaffer served as the Chief Counsel for the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. He attended the University of Chicago Law School, the Naval War College for a master's degree, and received his bachelor's degree from UCLA, and we welcome you here this afternoon. Our next witness will be Justin Zief, who's co-founder and Chief Strategy Officer of NISIS Group in Alexandria, Virginia. The NISIS Group is a collection of former military and intelligence agency officials who specialize in cyber warfare, counterterrorism, and geopolitical operatives. Before the NISIS Group, Mr. Zief worked for the Department of Defense. He went to law school at the Boston University School of Law and earned his bachelor's from the Ohio State University. We welcome you here this afternoon, Mr. Zief. Our third witness is Nova Daly, Senior Public Policy Advisor at Wiley Ryan, LLP in Washington, D.C. There, Mr. Daly, or here, Mr. Daly specializes in international trade, cybersecurity, data, and network security issues. Prior to joining Wiley Ryan, Mr. Daly held senior positions at the Departments of Treasury and Commerce, the White House, and the U.S. Senate. Mr. Daly received his master's in international law and organizations from American University and his bachelor's from the University of California, Irvine. We welcome you here, and I would now like to yield to the ranking member for the introduction of our fourth and final witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Angela Dingle, founder, president, and CEO of Ex Nihilo Management, a management and consulting firm that specializes in strategic assessments and information technology management. Ms. Dingle is a certified management consultant with over 20 years of experience in business leadership, IT, governance, and risk management. She holds an MS in Management Information System from Bowie State University and a BS in Computer Science from DeVry Institute. She's testifying today as a national partner for Women Impacting Public Policy, a national nonpartisan public policy organization advocating for and on behalf of women and minority in business. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jeffrey, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for inviting me and our panel here today to testify. I also want to thank the Chairman for his leadership on these issues. You had a successful amendment recently to State Department authorization legislation requiring the Comptroller General to report on the State Department's potential use of devices and systems from cyber threat nations. This is all the more important in light of FBI Director Comey's statement yesterday about the evidence they've acquired about the State Department's culture regarding the lack of security with respect to classified information, and in particular the critical role the State Department plays in negotiations with foreign countries and the sensitive information they deal with from allies. And in 2014 and 2015, we saw significant breaches of the State Department, breaches that actually led them to shut down their unclassified email systems and potentially expose classified or sensitive data. Now, look, we are in a very an evolving threat environment. The speed at which the internet is growing is dramatic. 26.3 billion devices by 2020, almost 3 network-connected devices per person. There are a lot of opportunities and benefits that this environment provides to us. People in developing nations will have the opportunity to access information and markets they never had the opportunity to. And for people in developed countries like ours, we'll have the opportunity to rapidly innovate. Small businesses will be at the leading edge of that innovation. Startups in the Silicon Valley, from Chattanooga, Tennessee, to Northern Virginia, to various other places in the country are at the heart of this developing internet environment. And in our new economy, protecting our technology and our innovative edge is critical. Now, there are huge issues with cybersecurity threats today. The vast majority of breaches today, 75% by one estimate, are focused on the United States. That includes 3 out of the top 5 breaches last year alone. Now, we know about the cyber threats we face from nation states. Countries like China are engaged in a constant and steady effort to siphon off our intellectual property for their own economic benefit. Russia is attempting to put in place efforts and programs for the next major conflict. North Korea and Iran increasingly have important cyber capabilities and are perhaps more willing than nations like China and Russia to use those capabilities. We've seen in recent years the use of destructive cyber attacks. We saw Saudi Aramco in 2012 and Qatari Razgas attacked 30,000 roughly computers bricked at Saudi Aramco. And here in the United States, with the Las Vegas Sands Corporation and the Sony Corporation last year, we saw cyber attacks where there was actual destructive efforts taking place. And that's a real concern. The DNI, the director of the NSA, the FBI director, and the CIA director have all recently told us that cyber threats are the #1 threat facing the nation, even exceeding the threat, as prevalent as it is, of counterterrorism. So key to protecting our cyberspace is ensuring the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information that flows through these networks. In order to do so, we must architect ourselves as a nation to defend against these threats. That means cooperation between the public and private sectors. Today, over 90% of the internet is controlled by the private sector. And today, we look to private sector companies to defend themselves. And yet, in no other context do we expect the private sector to defend themselves against nation-state threats. We don't expect Target, for example, to have surface-to-air missiles on the top of their warehouses. To be sure, we expect them to have high fences, armed guards, and perhaps guard dogs. but we don't expect them to defend against a Russian bomber coming and bombing their warehouses. And yet, we expect our private sector companies today to defend against the Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans, and the Iranians. So we need to have a national conversation about how to defend ourselves. Now, this is not to say that we expect the government to be on our networks at all times, constantly protecting the nation with surveillance and the like methods. Nobody wants that today. To the contrary, we enjoy an open, free internet. But we have to have that conversation about what the right role for the government and the private sector working together is in this modern threat environment. And in particular with China, we've talked about their IP theft, but one other thing we should really talk about is their desire to access key U.S. infrastructure. When I was at the House Intelligence Committee working for Chairman Mike Rogers, our committee issued a report talking about the threat posed by Huawei and ZTE, two major Chinese telecommunications companies, to U.S. infrastructure. That report had very strong recommendations over 4 years ago about what the government and private sector entities should do with respect to Huawei and ZTE, and it's critical, as the chairman's amendment does, that we continue to look at this issue. I'd like to sum up by saying there are sort of 7 things that we could consider doing as a country, Congress working with the private sector to address these issues. Number 1, large and small businesses alike need to think about and get buy-in from their highest levels, board of directors to the C-suite, down to workers, about the need for cybersecurity. Second, small businesses must consider working together collaboratively to share cyber threat information and use their collective buying power to address cyber threats. Number 3, small businesses and large businesses must work together with the government to share information in real time and network speed. Fourth, we need to get more serious about deterring cyber threats. We need to make sure that the government gives more classified information to private sector entities. We need to consider positive incentives like tax breaks for investments in cybersecurity and information sharing. And finally, if Congress is willing, we may want to consider amendments to the recently passed Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act to provide better and more incentives for cybersecurity information sharing. That's just a short list, but thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know I'm over time. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Zief, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member Velazquez, and all Small Business Committee members for the opportunity to testify on foreign cyber threats to American small business. It is an honor to address members of this distinguished body, both as a small business owner and also as a citizen who notes that small businesses not only employ 50% of the private sector workforce in this country, but also produce approximately 50% of the non-farming GDP in the United States. They are, therefore, a vital part of the economy, and their well-being and the need to ensure their ability to operate in a transparent and secure environment is paramount. My name is Justin Zief. I'm co-founder and chief strategy officer of the Nisos Group, a cybersecurity firm in Alexandria, Virginia, composed of entirely former elite cyber operators and U.S. Special Forces officers. I and each of my associates have more than a decade of assessing and mitigating cyber risk to U.S. national security interests. We each observed over recent years a shift by foreign cyber threats increasingly toward private sector concerns. This evolution, magnified by our observation that the commercial sector is wildly unprepared for this inbound threat, prompted us to bring our capabilities to industry. It is also an honor to speak to you today regarding the most significant present and near-term threat to national business economy, foreign cyber threats in the form of cyber crime. There are no shortages of statistics to this end. It is indeed the fastest growing economic crime according to PwC and is projected to cost the global economy $445 billion by the end of 2016. In fact, according to McAfee, the well-known security research firm, if cybercrime were a country, its GDP would rank 27th in the world, above Austria, Norway, and Egypt, along with others. How would we collectively react if we knew that the 27th largest economy in the world was absolutely dedicated to attacking our value? What if they were overwhelmingly directing their actions against small business here in the United States? In fact, if you turn both of those into statements, they would be accurate. Symantec, another very well-respected research firm, found in June of 2015 that 75% of cyber attacks were directed at organizations with fewer than 2,500 employees, a dramatic increase from years prior. Not a week goes by that we don't read about a major data breach in the paper, with mention of what the attackers stole and often how they managed to gain access. Most voices and solutions in the field of cybersecurity address the what and the how of the threat, yet without an intimate understanding of the threat actors, their motivations, vulnerabilities, capabilities, and intent, and adaptability, the discussion is really incomplete. Never in the history of mankind has there been an industry, illicit or otherwise, which could be addressed strategically without factoring in the players of the game. Cybercrime and the threat it represents against small business and large alike is no outlier. This very thing, the why, is a vital part of the equation which requires understanding the humans behind the threat, and just as importantly, the vulnerabilities which these threat actors seek to exploit. By understanding the driving forces and motivations behind the threat actors, as well as the evolution of their tools, it is possible to narrow the gap between threat actor capability and cybersecurity solutions in the marketplace. Once we understand those threat actors and their motivations, it becomes easier to model future behavior from state-sanctioned or state-sponsored activity and criminal enterprise, the source of almost all cyber incidents. Armed with these insights, only then should we deliberately consider legislative incentives, penalties, and the appropriate distribution of risk to aid, not hamper, small business. So why? Why do foreign cyber threats target small business? One word and one analogy are sufficient to encapsulate this trend. The word is profit, and the analogy is that like water or electricity, malicious actors follow the path of least resistance. As larger organizations professionalize their defensive and reactive posture to cyber incidents, and as stolen data became less profitable due to stricter regulatory and law enforcement environments, threat actors in search of profit turned the focus of their targets to small business, which had neither the capacity nor the budget to address this threat. A positive feedback loop ensued and continues to this day, in which threat actors become only more dangerous as they adapt to this sophisticated target set and the unsophisticated target set alike. The first and most significant evolution was the professionalization of the threat actor. What only a few years ago was best described as small bands of hackers who occasionally work together have, by virtue of their success, drawn the attention of traditional organized crime. These groups, with many years of experience in the conduct of criminal enterprise, accurately assessed that cybercrime represented an opportunity for increased profit and decreased risk. Rather than trafficking in weapons, drugs, or other contraband, as they had been accustomed, activities dependent on physical items which present a significant risk of detection or interdiction, these groups of experienced criminals increasingly invest in individuals or groups whose cybercrime activities are wildly successful and stealthy when it comes to attribution. In conclusion, it is vital that we not only consider the what and the how, but the why and the actors behind these incidents. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Daly, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Velasquez and members of this committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before you today. Today I offer my perspective on cybersecurity broadly and distinctly as it pertains to small business. My perspective is drawn from experience as a former official with the U.S. Department of Treasury, helping administer the Committee on Foreign Investment for the United States, which saw much cybersecurity transactions, with the National Security Council helping with not only trade and investment, but also cyber policy, and also in the private sector working with my colleagues to help small businesses and businesses confront the cybersecurity threats that are out there. As this committee knows very well, cybersecurity issues are clearly significant and growing economic risks for all small businesses and Americans broadly. These issues have become increasingly relevant as we now depend on internet access and connectivity in nearly every aspect of our work and lives, from the communication devices and processing devices we use at home at work, to the vehicles we drive, the infrastructure we depend on, and even the appliances in our home. It has been forecast that on average 5.5 million new devices are connected to the internet each day, and that by 2020 over 20 billion devices will be connected to the internet. For small businesses, the very connectivity that allows for greater freedom and versatility in conducting day-to-day business, linking phones, computers, routers, copiers, even alarms and ventilation systems, also brings with it significant and sometimes paralyzing risk that is often difficult to address both financially and in terms of human resources. As small businesses increase their connectivity to the internet, they face significant challenges, not just in infrastructure and the nuts and bolts of establishing business connectivity, but also in security-related costs. Both domestic and foreign criminals, as well as foreign governments, have been known to exploit and are even actively targeting internet-based vulnerabilities in order to gain access to financial information, customer data, and intellectual property. 3 years ago, a study issued by the Center for Strategic and International Studies estimated that the annual cost of cybercrime in the U.S. was $1 billion. According to more recent reports, cybercrime costs quadrupled since then and are even going to quadruple into 2015 to 2019. While large businesses typically have the means to fund and invest in strong and resilient cybersecurity measures to protect their interests, small businesses generally do not have this luxury. They often lack the capabilities or the resources to pursue strong entity-wide cyber protections. Further, small businesses often may not be privy to the kinds of broad, industry-wide threat notifications to which larger companies may be. Often larger companies have the resources to continually monitor and review threats that may arise from certain technology and supply chains, and at times are contacted by the U.S. government when breaches occur. A notable example was 2014 Department of Justice investigation and prosecution of several Chinese military officials who were responsible for breaches of numerous U.S. companies' security perimeters. There, at least some of the affected companies were contacted and alerted while the breaches were occurring. However, given the breadth of existing cyber threats and continued growth of our cybercrime, our government simply does not have the resources to address all the cybersecurity-related issues faced by businesses, critical infrastructure, and government systems, let alone those faced by small business. In 2012, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence issued a report on its findings regarding security threats posed by certain telecommunications companies doing business in the United States. Despite the report's negative findings, the companies investigated continue to grow as dominant players in the global technology market. While it has been effectively restricted from selling network equipment to Tier 1 carriers, Huawei is growing its sales to smaller wireless U.S. carriers, supplying network infrastructure equipment to cities in states of Washington and Oregon, and is targeted to continue growth in cell phone sales. Last year, ZTE was the fourth largest smartphone vendor in the United States with 7.2% market share. Both these companies were notably sanctioned for export control violations. Although much larger U.S. companies can engage other vendors, and many vendors, to provide certain cybersecurity monitoring and reinforcement of their perimeters, small businesses don't have the funds or capacity to do so. While doing business with such companies can present heightened risk, it should not be overlooked that there is significant and growing vulnerability within the entire U.S. technology supply chain. Increasingly, our technology, communications equipment, and systems are produced or assembled abroad, and we are seeing nations taking strong measures to grow their own semiconductor and technology industries. Further, the United States is finding itself with a talent shortage in cybersecurity. So how do we deal with this issue? I present a couple ideas. Or perspectives or views. First, focus on current laws. Enforcement is key. We should continue to do so. It sends signals to the market and to the private business and small business. Promote cyber standards. We should consider frameworks such as ISO standards to promote best practices. We should engage small businesses not only in education and outreach, but also in funding. A bill that was introduced, H.R. 5064, the Improving Small Business Cybersecurity Act of 2016, would be an important ends. And lastly, we have to address the supply chain security issues in the United States and close the cyber deficit. Right, as I mentioned earlier, our supply chains and much of our equipment is being produced abroad. If we lose the capabilities and talents, not only in cybersecurity, but also in our capabilities of technology, we will lose our edge and our innovation. Thank you very much for this time.
Thank you very much. Ms. Dingle, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member Velazquez, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Angela Dingle. I am the president and CEO of Ex Nihilo, a woman-owned small business based in Washington, D.C. that provides cybersecurity, IT governance, and risk management services to government agencies. I am here today representing Women Impacting Public Policy, which is a national nonpartisan public policy organization advocating on behalf of women entrepreneurs. First, I would like to thank the committee for holding this hearing. Few topics are as timely as today's hearing. The National Cybersecurity Alliance found that 60% of businesses will close within 6 months of a cyber attack. Narrowing the focus, businesses that work with the federal government are an additional security risk, given that the U.S. government's research data and engineering specifications are of high value to individuals, companies, and governments across the world. Due to increasing privacy requirements and recent cybersecurity attacks, the Department of Defense responded by implementing new contract requirements. In August of 2015, DoD finalized a regulation requiring companies of all sizes to safeguard unclassified, controlled technical information that resides on their information systems. The goal of the rule is to provide minimum standards to protect government information that finds its way into contractor information systems. The guidelines include 14 families of security requirements, commonly known as security controls or security objectives, that must be satisfied. These groupings range from identification and authentication to physical protection. Contractors that do not implement safeguards for the 14 families must submit a written explanation of why the required security control is not applicable, or explain how an alternative control or protective measure is being used to achieve the same level of protection. This past February, the SBA Office of Advocacy found that this DoD rule grossly underestimated the number of affected small businesses. The cost of compliance with this rule will be a significant barrier to small businesses engaging in the federal acquisition process. Even more concerning is the May 2016 National Industrial Security Program Operating Manual, or NISPOM, Conforming Change 2, commonly referred to as the Insider Threat Program. This regulation stems directly from concerns over contractor employees' ability to bypass security safeguards. The rule requires contractors to gather, integrate, and report relevant, credible information that may indicate a potential or actual insider threat. It is especially burdensome for small businesses because it has to be implemented by November 30th, 2016. WIP is particularly concerned about the significant burdens associated with these new requirements and their potential to push woman-owned firms out of the federal market. Lack of technical knowledge is not an excuse for failure to comply with basic cybersecurity regulations. Small businesses need to proactively understand the scope and impact of changes on the business, align organizational policies, practices, and procedures to comply, empower those with the technical expertise necessary to implement changes, provide adequate training to ensure employees are aware of their responsibilities, and hold individuals accountable for compliance. The first step is to get a jump start on the new requirements by assessing current information systems and determining changes necessary for compliance with new guidelines. Implementing effective governance processes can help small businesses manage information security risk, increase stakeholder confidence, and reduce the costs associated with compliance. To that end, small businesses could use assistance in determining their cybersecurity needs. WIP supports Representative Hanna's H.R. 5064, which was included in this year's National Defense Authorization Act. The legislation authorizes small business development centers to support small businesses in developing affordable cybersecurity plans. However, we would encourage the committee to consider adding other SBA resource partners, including over 100 women's business centers. In conclusion, women entrepreneurs consider the federal marketplace a key opportunity to grow their businesses. While there is a need to protect federal data and small businesses need to protect themselves from cyber attacks, the government has gone too far with new regulations. One size did not fit all. Ensuring that new cybersecurity requirements are attainable for small businesses is of paramount importance. This committee has always acted in a bipartisan manner to support women entrepreneurs, and we appreciate your examination of this issue. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. And we'll now move into the questioning part, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Sheffer, I'll begin with you. When a foreign company is caught stealing data or information from another entity, what are the common enforcement mechanisms available, and what recommendations would you make to improve on those enforcement mechanisms in order to further deter foreign cyber attacks?
Sure. Well, Mr. Chairman, part of the challenge, as you know, with foreign companies stealing U.S. information is our ability to get jurisdiction over them, particularly if they're state actors. State actors are particularly the most problematic whether it's China or its proxies or other nation states stealing our information is something we've got to critically address. And the best way, particularly to deter nation states from doing it, whether they're operating through their companies or not, is to have a deterrence policy. And I think the key elements of a deterrence policy are, one, describing what our capabilities are, describing how we might use them if and when we have information stolen or attacks made on our country, and then actually carrying those out. And part of it is credibility. And so that's one of them. In addition, we obviously have, the ability to prosecute folks, but we've got to be able to get jurisdiction over them. That's the really hard part.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Zief, I'll move to you next. You had mentioned, why are so many small businesses in particular targeted, and you said it's because of profit. It's the least resistance is among small business folks. What are a few things that small business folks who may be watching there or may hear about the hearing or that we may correspond with, what are some things that practically that they could do, small businesses, to protect themselves from cyber attacks?
Thank you. The majority of threat actors operating today are operating for profit, as mentioned. The best thing that a small business could do is ensure that their network is relatively secure by following the protocols that are relatively standard across the industry, across all industry. That is, ensuring that you have configured your network correctly, ensuring that you are encrypting your most sensitive data when possible, not being lax when it comes to security. Ensuring that your password management is reasonable, ensuring that the folks who have administrator access on your domain do not use the same password there as they do at their gymnasium or anywhere else that might be hacked. Because very regularly these hacks come through third-party incidents. So it's not that your business is hacked, but rather that a third party is hacked. I gain credentials to your business and I use them.
Thank you very much. Mr. Daly, I'll move to you next if I can. And this is somewhat related to what I just discussed with Mr. Zief here, but what are some of the common mistakes that you see made by small business folks that leave them vulnerable to cyber attacks?
Sure. I think it's definitely sort of not providing the education within their own workforce to let their employees know the vulnerabilities that are out there in terms of making sure their passwords are protected, making sure the systems are protected in the way they operate it. So I think it's sort of that employee knowledge. I think also in terms of not necessarily the equipment, but making sure they have the right software, making sure it's updated and continuously taking sort of a proactive approach to the cybersecurity that they provide their systems.
Okay. Thank you very much. Ms. Dingle, let me ask you this. When you started off, it kind of struck me that you said that 60% of businesses, I guess small businesses in particular, close within 6 months of a cyber attack. And I had mentioned in my opening statement that the average loss is about $32,000 that a business suffers. Could you want to expound upon why such a large number do go out of business when there is a cyber attack? And are there any stories or cases in particular that you'd want to let us know about?
Certainly, as many of the panelists here have spoken about, the cost of responding to a cybersecurity breach is very expensive. And as this committee may be aware, small businesses don't necessarily have the financial means. They don't necessarily have reserves that they can quickly allocate to address a cybersecurity breach. Mm-hmm. And so the cost of having to pay for outside expertise to come in and help to investigate and identify the actual problem that has occurred and mitigate that can be very expensive, and that's why they end up going out of business. I personally know of small businesses who have, just like some of the other panelists have spoken about, just really did not understand what it takes to properly secure their business, only to be hacked or to have a security breach, and really have had to tap a number of different resources that one would tap to finance your business for payroll or other sources to try to combat these cybersecurity issues.
Thank you very much. My time's expired. Gentlelady from New York, ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Dingle, as you mentioned before, the DoD, NASA, and GSA recently issued rules pertaining to all future federal contracts which require contractors to implement a set of cybersecurity measures to safeguard information. And more agencies will continue to identify and prioritize cyber standards. What can we do to ensure that small contractors are involved in this process as uniform cybersecurity guidelines are developed?
Thank you. I think it's really important that small businesses have education sources. A lot of times these discussionings are happening in environments where small businesses don't necessarily have a representative or a presence. Like the Federal Acquisition Council may be having discussions about the timing on when these will be implemented. And although there was research that was done about that DoD rule as the owner of a federal contractor, we certainly were not questioned about how timely we thought the requirement should be with respect to our ability to comply. And so I think education is really important, and allowing the small business resource centers to provide that education would be extremely helpful to small businesses.
And do you see any active role being played by the Small Business Administration to make sure that small businesses understand the risks so that they could implement cybersecurity measures?
I think that in the last 12 months, I have seen webinars and other information that the SBA has tried to make available to small businesses. But again, depending on how small the business is, finding the time to participate in those and to stay ahead of and abreast of those is really what's difficult. And so again, these partnerships between the SBA and resource centers and organizations such as WIP to educate small businesses is what I think would really be beneficial to them.
Thank you. Mr. Schaefer, federal spending to combat cybercrime continues to grow at an extremely rapid rate. What steps can be taken to tap the unique talents of nimble small technology firms in an effort to strengthen our national security defenses?
Thank you, Ranking Member Velasquez. No, I think that's exactly right. We have to tap the resources that startup companies in the Silicon Valley and across the nation have, the innovative ideas to address these concerns the federal government has. But the federal government's challenged when it comes to buying from small startups. There are all these regulations that Ms. Dingle correctly talked about that make it hard for small businesses to get in front of and actually sell to the government, even though they have some of the best, newest ideas. And so we've got to figure out a way to reduce that burden on small businesses and allow the government to buy from the most innovative parts of our community and to address these very real threats. If we don't do that, we're never going to have access to that capability. It's unfortunate because the government, most of all, needs that access to innovative, smart, capable, companies that are at the leading edge of cybersecurity technology. And I think Mrs. Dingle is exactly correct. We've got to reduce the regulatory burden on those companies.
Thank you. Mr. Daly, nearly every single company selling technology to the U.S. Government and consumers, HP, Dell, Cisco, Apple, use foreign components in their products. Many of these products are used by small businesses. If there are any ill intentions, small firms are often not savvy enough to monitor foreign threats posed by these products or components. What danger does this product integration within our market pose for small firms, and what is the best way to assist small firms in combating it?
Yeah, thank you, Member. I think the threats to our supply chain are very significant, extremely, and they permeate not only to large businesses, but our government systems and small businesses equally as well. So those vulnerabilities that the large businesses have, small businesses are going to have as well. The issue is how to address that. And I think, as I sort of alluded to, we have to think long-term and structurally towards ways we can secure our supply chains, whether that be standards we're going to do in terms of making sure that the equipment is certified to a certain industry-held standard, and then that standard maybe is something that the GSA or purchasing complies with, that'll permeate its way into the private sector and flow down to small business.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. General Lady's time's expired. The gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Lukemeyer, who is the vice chairman of this committee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mr. Jaffer, you made some interesting comments, and I appreciate your being here today. You were talking a minute ago with regards to the small businesses and being attacked and the venues for going after the attackers. And I want to focus on the small business because I think you were talking mainly about the government side of this, but I'm going to talk about the small business guys. If you got a small business out here and they get attacked by a hacker, where do they go? Who's a law enforcement agency that they need to go to talk to get some sort of restitution? Is it possible? Because I think a comment was made a minute ago with regards to tracking these people down, and if it's a government-sponsored hack, how do you go after something like that? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. You know, the first responder in these circumstances typically is the FBI, and small businesses, large businesses should go to the FBI. The challenge I think we have as a government, though, is, you've got DHS out there talking about its capabilities. You've got FBI. You've got DOD. Everyone's talking about the role they play, and we as a government haven't done a very good job of bringing that together and telling the private sector, particularly small businesses, who the lead is. So when it comes to investigations, I think the Bureau is the first place to go, and the local field office. And the FBI is engaged in an effort to, build bridges, but they're typically doing it with large companies, and we need to figure out how to get small businesses, particularly perhaps through small business resource centers like Mrs. Dingle highlighted, and get the FBI and other agencies in with those part of the community to better address their concerns when they're hacked.
Do we have the ability, and have you seen cases where we actually win against the bad guys? We catch the bad guys, and then we get the small business gets restitution for whatever IP they've lost?
So I'm not aware of specific examples. I know that we've prosecuted folks and put them in jail. Getting actual restitution may be harder, and it may be an opportunity for Congress to consider legislation to actually create a cause of action to allow going after foreign cyber threat actors for restitution with stolen IP.
Okay, so right now we're just sort of because there's limited ability to get restitution, the small business is sitting there basically kind of on its own, in that if it gets hacked, hopefully the information is not such that's going to drive it out of business.
Yeah, one area to think about might be to look at sanctions collections and look at that as a potential pot of money that's here domestically that might be accessed by small business and other folks that are hacked by foreign nation state actors or foreign companies.
Very good. Mr. Daly, you talked a minute ago about a talent shortage in cybersecurity, and it's kind of interesting because today in the Washington Times, on the commentary section, there's a story titled "Meeting the Cyber Challenge," and in the article it says, during the last 20 years, the size and skill level of the technology workforce has not kept pace with the demand for workers. Routinely, American companies and government agencies post more job vacancies than there are qualified candidates to fill. Over 3/4 of K through 12 schools do not offer computer science classes. And the article goes on to say that the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that almost 5 million jobs will be available in computing and information technology by 2024. So it looks like and the gist of the article is to try and get Congress to spend more money and help bridge this technology gap. But we've got a problem here with, it's recognized by a lot of folks apparently, that we've got a shortage of people in this field to be able to do the work to protect our companies, our government, our assets from being hacked or being taken advantage of. Where do we go from here? I mean, this is very concerning because if we don't have the technology, the experts to be able to keep us in the lead, we're going to fall behind, and then we're going to be in really big trouble. So, care to comment?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. I've talked to folks at Mandiant and Symantec and McAfee and others, and this is something that's very apparent that really we don't have the capabilities really to deal with this sort of knowledge-based gap in cybersecurity. So I think you have to make market incentives that drive market-based incentives that drive people to want to get that education, want to get those capabilities, and that's where people respond. Look, if they can get a great job, they're going to do the extra additional technology training, go to additional schooling to be able to have a job that's going to be very secure. And, unfortunately, I took a recent trip and talked to 3 folks who are in college. They told me they were psych majors. I was like, that's great, but, we really need to get back to the basics, focus on the technologies that are going to be core and find incentives, market-based incentives to get us there.
Thank you. I do go back to balance my time.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, who's a ranking member of the Investigations, Oversight, and Regulations Subcommittee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member Velasquez, for hosting the hearing today, and thank you all for your testimony. My first question, Mr. Jaffer, it seems like most cybersecurity solutions are geared toward larger companies, leaving small and medium-sized enterprises vulnerable to cyber criminals and hackers. What options are there for small businesses that want to protect themselves but have limited resources?
Yes, ma'am, that's a great question. I think one opportunity that small businesses could take is to band together in associations or the like to use their purchasing power to buy larger scale cybersecurity solutions, have perhaps common security operations centers. You know, a lot of these big companies have, you know, these amazing rooms with big flat screen TVs, and they're looking at all the cyber threats confronting them. Small businesses don't have the ability to do that, obviously, and so maybe by banding together through their associations, they can buy that capability from larger companies and work collectively.
Okay. One issue for small firms is the theft of intellectual property, and this type of crime can be devastating to small firms and will result, as has been said, many of them going out of business. So how can IP theft, particularly from small businesses, hurt our economy and national security?
Well, again, I think you're absolutely right. It's a totally crushing threat, particularly for small businesses, but net for our larger economy. As we shift to this technology-driven industrial and services economy, our economy fundamentally depends on our innovative capabilities and our ability to protect our intellectual property. If we can't do that, and today we simply aren't, China's taking it right out the back door in tremendous amounts, we've got to find a way to do that, and that's a collective government-private sector problem together. And I think we've got to address for small businesses, as Ms. Stingle said, through the SBA and other organizations.
Thank you. Mr. Zafri, human error can usually be blamed for a fair amount of security breaches. So how could setting a minimum threshold for cybersecurity best practices help small firms reduce the number of and severity of cyber attacks?
Thank you for the question. In my experience thus far, the cybersecurity insurance industry has been setting the benchmark for that by creating checklists and essentially a punch list of things that an organization must accomplish in order to qualify for a policy, and then identifying and closing those loopholes which might trigger that policy or an exemption thereto. Probably the best way ultimately is for both the small business community around the United States as well as government to create a regimented checklist of things that organizations must do, and many of them revolve around human error, which incidentally is the vector by which the vast majority of these attacks are promulgated.
Could these best practices also help to reduce the burdens and the cost of keeping up with ever-changing threats?
They could, and to your last point, they also have to be ever-changing because the methodology by which these attacks are conducted is shifting in response to our defensive posture. So in order for us to stay ahead of the problem, we have to focus, in my opinion, we have to focus less on purely automated solutions and more on a hybrid of understanding what can be automated and that which cannot be automated has to be human-driven, as the threat is entirely human-driven.
Okay, Ms. Dingle, implementation costs for IT security is a paramount concern. Causes that can cause smaller institutions to lose or even decide not to compete for bids against larger companies for federal and state government bids. In your estimation, what steps can be taken to ensure that small businesses don't have to choose between security and their bottom line?
Thank you for the question, and it's really an interesting one. In particular, entry into the federal marketplace can really make or break a revenue source for a small business. And with these new regulations, very often a small business does have to make that choice. And I think providing some balance between what's expected of a very large corporation and what's expected of a small corporation from a cybersecurity standpoint is going to be that balancing act. So is it that everyone has to comply all at the same time, or to one of the other panelists' point, is it possible for small businesses to be able to band together to try to address those requirements? In particular, the DoD regulation that I mentioned earlier in my testimony requires that the small business itself handle some of those things. So they really have taken away that small business's ability to partner with either a contractor or with someone else to assist them in solving the problem. So just some flexibility in a small business's ability to respond would be helpful.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I yield back. I'm out of time.
Thank you. The gentlelady's time has expired. Gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Kelly is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. In my experience working with small businesses, number one is just the educational or technical expertise of owners in this area is lacking. It's also very expensive in time. It's inconvenient. It's expensive in money. And so a lot of times small businesses use the hope method, which is I just hope I don't get attacked, and they don't do that. So it's very frustrating. You know, I'm in the Guard, and I've spent time with cybersecurity, also as a district attorney's office when I was there. And a lot of the things that you have to do are extremely frustrating, especially to upper management, old people like me who don't understand what these kids understand. So we don't like changing our passwords because we can't remember it. We don't like keeping things on separate computers, you know, because it's inconvenient. We don't like all the things that are necessary to do that. And that's across the board, whether you're military, whether you're civilian, and small business is a cost. But the reality is they can't afford not to be prepared for this, because I also know that hard targets right now are going to be bypassed because there's plenty of weak targets out there. How do we get this message across? And Mr. Jaffer and Mr. Zeef, if you would answer this, how do we get this message across to our small business owners in a way that they understand you can't afford to be a soft target? You've got to harden up.
No, I think, Mr. Kelly, that's exactly right. I think we've got to figure out a way to ensure that small businesses get how critical it is to them. I mean, for them, at the core of their business is their reputation and their intellectual property, that innovative thing that makes them special and that makes them more competitive against these bigger companies. That's what makes them unique and makes such a productive part of our economy. So we've got to, I think, through the SBA and other organizations, the organizations that this committee has jurisdiction over, we've got to explain to them that at the heart of their role as a small business is to protect that very unique edge. And without doing that, you know, they're going to be much more vulnerable than larger businesses are, and it's a real problem.
There's a number of policy prescriptions we could put in place or encourage, but ultimately I suspect it will be an existential event or a series of existential events whereby a number of medium or large-sized companies have their reputations damaged or financial positions damaged to such a point as they go out of business. I think that will be the clarion call that brings some awareness to the table. By and large, the reason that small businesses are being attacked with such aggressiveness as they are is because they are so weak, because they are the third-party providers to larger organizations, and because they can be squeezed for small amounts of money across the board. So as an attacker, I can go after 10 or 15 companies in an hour and extract $10,000 or $15,000 from each apiece, far easier than I can going after a large financial institution and making an effort there. So the short answer is I don't know that there is much that can be done other than making this a public affair.
Mr. Jaffer, I'm a father, so I have a young kid, and I like to take, we all want to take home, especially when we don't have the means to buy multiple tools. So, you know, a lot of parents take home their work computer and let their kids play game on their work iPad or their work iPhone or whatever other, whether it be, and they let them use those, and they don't understand that there's a danger of spillage, and that's what we refer to in the military as spillage. Is when you take something from one net and take it to another net and expose it to threats that you don't have to. Again, how is there any way that you can think of so we can let people understand that when you take either different classifications of equipment, or of information, or when you have an intranet And when you expose it to the extranet, you know, you can't even use thumb drives on a lot of military computers and other things. How do we communicate this to let them know it's simple, but it's inconvenient?
Well, I think you raised a really good point. I've got a 7-year-old, Nico, and he plays on my iPad and my laptop. You're exactly right. And, you know, he recently purchased a bunch of apps on, and so I learned about parental controls sort of firsthand. So, you know, I think we got to create separate accounts for our kids and for other family members that don't have access to those parts of the system. Now, of course, you know, hackers will be able to get through some of those walls, but the higher we can build those walls, just at the very basic level, keeping your system up to date, patch, creating separate accounts, that can help a lot. And for small businesses, doing small things like that can make a big difference. And, you know, as you said, you know, they're going after the weakest targets. And so we've got to make ourselves stronger and less weak targets, not be the weak gazelle in the herd, as it were.
I don't have to run faster than Bear. I just have to run faster than you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Jaffer, I hope you'll encourage your son to go on the Small Business Committee website. I'm sure he'll find this fascinating. So,
As long as you have apps to purchase.
all right. The gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Lawrence, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Ms. Dingle, in your views, you stated that there were some webinars available for small businesses, but has the SBA proven to be effective in educating the small business owners and employers on the need to safeguard against potential threats? And in your view, what are some of the recommendations you had? I heard that we really need to get this going, and it's so critical. So can I get your opinion and recommendations?
Sure. Let me first address the latter part of your comment about whether or not people have been informed. Cybersecurity and information technology is a huge, huge issue. And so for businesses that are not for companies that are not in the business of providing information technology products or services, it's a whole new world, for lack of a better term. And so if you have a firm whose day-to-day business is providing healthcare services or providing home improvement services, they're not thinking about technology. So the SBA, even if it is able to help, has to first make businesses aware that these regulations and the cybersecurity issues apply to all of us. I don't think that across the board people understand that this is a problem that affects us all. It affects us as individuals, it affects us as employees, as managers, and as business owners. So I am in the information technology space, so I don't look to the SBA for that assistance. I will tell you that I've not seen a lot of that. That does not mean that the resources are not available. I can tell you that in trying to comply with the newest set of regulations, even though we're in the technology business, they are occurring so quickly that we have to bring in external resources to even help us to comply with them all. And the SBA would if there were small business cyber centers that were available where we could go and, to Mr. Jaffer's point, combine our resources to get access to the tools and technologies and expertise that we need to address this problem, that would really be helpful and beneficial.
I try to support small business, and they have these pop-ups. And so I went to one of these pop-ups, and so I saw something I wanted to purchase. And the owner of this, upcoming business said, I can't take a credit card. I've been hacked. And so she went over to a fellow pop-up person there saying, we're friends. Can you pay? I found that very concerning, because here she is trying to start a business, and the pop-up industry is so exciting and really growing around America. And before she got off the ground, she had been hacked, and it impaired her ability to take credit cards because they had shut her down. Yeah. The other question I have is to Mr. Daly. In your testimony, you mentioned strengthening information sharing initiatives as a way to engage small business. Can you briefly talk about the organizations, we call them ISAOs, I think, that were established by the executive order of President Obama in 2015, and is it enough, or what do we need to enhance it?
Yeah, I think it was definitely very helpful, and I think sort of the work that is looking toward, making SBA do, I think is also very helpful. I guess one of the intuitive things I draw from is one of the things we did at the White House when we knew intellectual property was being stolen to such a degree. We did an entire initiative where we essentially ran it out of the White House, pulling all the agencies together, saying, look, can we do a combined initiative? It's called the STOP Initiative. And we combined the resources of all the different departments, made sure that they communicated, functioned, and had a one-stop shop for dealing with that issue. So I still think, while it's helpful, I think that sort of initiative needs to occur.
So that did it occur and stop, or is it still available?
It did occur, and in terms of STOP, yeah, it did occur, and that's still Department of Commerce. We have an IP czar that was established and continued, and so it led to a number of initiatives, not only creating a czar, but creating commerce as a point, and really was able to put new legislation as part of it too. So it was effective.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Davidson, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for you all being here and having some good information for small businesses and for our committee. So it's a pleasure to talk with you guys. Ms. Dingle, one of my questions involves the National Institute of Standards and Technology framework. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
Okay. How have you found that to be? I think there was recently a review in April. How's that process going? Is that likely to have, what kind of impact is that likely to have for small businesses and industry in general?
So the NIST framework that you reference really does provide a framework for all things information security with respect to how you protect your information systems. There's an overarching 853 special publication that is revised on a regular basis recently to revision 4. And then there are associated special publications that have to do with various things that need to be protected. It is essentially the Bible that one needs to follow with respect to securing your systems. And the challenge when you talk about a small business being able to comply with that, I talked about the new regulation for Department of Defense that had 14 families of controls. This one has much larger families of control to the tune to 200 to 300 things that a technical person would have to implement in order to secure a system. So it is in terms of a guideline, it is a very clear and distinct guideline on how one should protect information systems. It's just that it is a very big set of regulations.
Okay. Maybe Mr. Jaffer, internationally, are there any technologies or practices that are not currently accessible or permissible here in the United States that are in use elsewhere in the world that would actually improve our cybersecurity here?
Well, thank you, Mr. Davidson. I'm not aware of any specific technologies, but I do think that this goes to the larger issue about getting innovation into our system, whether it's foreign or American. We've got to find, particularly as a government, but also as large businesses, ways to buy from the most innovative amongst us, those startups, those young companies. And, I think as Ms. Dingle correctly highlighted, it's a real challenge for small businesses worldwide to get into the U.S. government sector. And the U.S. government needs our help. It needs the help of small startup companies to get in there and give them innovative ideas. And so whether it's international or the U.S., we've got to figure out a way to make that happen, I think, sir.
Thank you.
Sir.
Mr. Zeef, sorry if I mispronounced it correct, but in the assessment that you do, it sounds like you do a bit of a overall view of security. Is there a best practice that you would say, globally, if there's a country that really has a strong, that's actually connected to the grid? Obviously, the countries that have no infrastructure maybe are more secure because there's nothing to be hacked. But those of us that choose to have access to the world, who has the best practices right now? If we wanted to say, is the U.S. a world leader or is the U.S. lagging? And who is leading?
There are probably statistics on this using which metrics I don't know, but I would say Estonia would be a surprising but accurate choice. They are the home of the NATO's Cyber Center of Excellence. They are very careful to prescribe best practices to both their citizens as well as their companies that are formed from within the country. And they take it very seriously, particularly as they've got Russia on their doorstep. Whether and where the United States would rank in that, to be honest, I don't know.
Not sure. Okay, and then Mr. Daly, just a question. In light of this week's news about the handling of confidential or if not classified information and the security, are there new laws that ought to be in place to make it clear that all of America, not just are subject to the Lady Justice, not that there's no exemptions regardless of whomever you are?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good and tough question, and you know, I think the laws in terms of handling classified information are fairly strong, and they're you just need a federal workforce that makes sure that it follows those guidelines strictly. And I know that when I had to handle that classified information, you know, losing that privilege meant the loss of my job and the loss of confidence. So I think just that public awareness is necessary. New laws, you know, that's something that could be considered, but I think, you know, just vigilance on what we do have is always a key. So,
The gentleman's time
Thank
has
you.
expired.
Yield back my time.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our ranking member. I thank our panelists for bringing your expertise to bear on today's subject matter. I want to start with Ms. Dingle by asking, what would you say are the greatest barriers for small contractors wishing to break into the federal marketplace as it pertains to cybersecurity guidelines?
Thank you for the question. For small businesses that are not familiar with doing business with the federal government, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, and in particular, if you're talking about doing business with the Department of Defense, is a whole nother language that they're not accustomed to. And again, as I was answering Ms. Adams' question, if you're not in the business of doing technology, the fact that you have to comply with these cybersecurity regulations that are very technical in nature can be a barrier. There are essentially 3 types of security measures that one needs to put in place. One has to do with management and operations. The other have to do with technical implementations. And so operations, management, and technical. And so the average business person is thinking about how to manage and operate their business, but then you add these technical requirements on top of it. And more and more often, when you submit a proposal to do business with the government, the requirements are already in the solicitation. So if you're not able to comply, then you can't compete for that business.
And what makes it difficult for small businesses to comply? Is it a financial? Is it a human resource issue? Is it a combination of both?
Yeah.
And does the SBA have a role in assisting those who may be themselves qualified but just not have the capacity as designated in the solicitations?
Certainly, it's a combination of those things, and I think it would be wonderful for new business owners as you go to the Small Business Administration to get information about how to define your target market and how to learn about how different federal agencies buy business. I think it would be really helpful if at that same time small businesses could learn about cybersecurity regulations, understand what their responsibility is, because then that gives you the information that you need to make a decision about whether or not you can actually do business with the federal market and how great the barriers are. And so it might be partnership with another business or teaming up with a larger business or holding off for a little bit of time until you can get the resources that you need to be able to satisfy all
And
of
build
those
the
requirements.
capacity. So you would say there's a threshold that business has to meet in order to even offer themselves with respect to these solicitations.
Certainly, the more and more that we begin to focus on cybersecurity, it becomes a threshold. It's a barrier to entry.
Very well, thank you. Mr. Daly, what recommendations would you have for encouraging public-private partnerships to address the cybersecurity needs of small businesses, particularly those that contract with the federal government?
yeah, I think you know, creating standards with government procurement. I mean, it's amazing how those standards flow down the line to secondary providers all the way down to small businesses. So, you know, if we set up a strong set of guidelines, for instance, there was a CGS appropriations bill that made critical systems required certain measures to protect critical systems, and NASA was involved in that too, and that flowed down their entire supply chain. So I think once you make sort of those standards, the market responds to it. And if we lift the water on our cybersecurity protections, I think all the boats, including small business boats, rise with it.
So you're saying that the standards aren't clear right now, or they're evolving? Because I mean, cybersecurity itself, that's a space that's continually shifting. How do we, standardize? I guess sort of a hygiene or a practice to the extent where a small business could actually sort of get in on the first floor.
Yeah, and I think that's that's, as you said, it's an evolving issue of cyber and what the attacks and vectors are. But I think as Ms. Dingle talked about, sort of the NIST standards, sort of creating a sort of a standards that's out there that sort of the government responds to in terms of its purchasing would be something that.
Just quickly to everyone on the panel, do you think it's possible for a small business to be able to actually meet those standards and still be considered small?
I do.
Okay.
I do as well.
Okay.
I think it's very hard. I think we've got to try and find a way to lift that burden.
Very well. Very well. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Hanna, who is the chairman of the Subcommittee on Contracting and Workforce, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm kind of curious, what's the shelf life of security? We know it has some expense to get into it, but the theme here is that it's a cat and mouse, constant getting unsecure, getting secure, getting unsecure. What does that look like in the real world? What does it cost in the real world? And what are the dynamics of that based on the size of your business? And so along with it, what would be that kind of critical mass that everybody has to spend? Anybody that might feel comfortable?
I would say relative to other forms of risk that enterprise, whether small or large, have faced in the past, cyber is relatively new. There's not a lot of actuarial data, whether you're looking at it from a regulatory or insurance.
But is it 6 months, a year, or a week?
I don't know that you can put a bracket around either side of it. It's continually evolving. It is, as you said, a cat and mouse game. A more apt analogy might be as you build a higher castle wall, I build a trebuchet. As you build a thicker castle wall, I develop air superiority.
So how do you manage that? I mean, but based on what you're saying, it's a moment by moment.
It is, but really all things offensive and defensive by definition have been. And so it's just a matter of staying ahead of the threat actors and making sure that you're not the most attractive target.
But then the next logical question for me would be, is that doable? I mean, in the real world, how with that kind of dynamic, Mr. Jaffer, you're...
Well, certainly for large companies, it's more doable than it is for small companies. So, the financial services sector is very innovative when it comes to defense, and they're constantly working together and evolving that. But that's why I think, we've got to figure out how to get small businesses to work together. They're not going to be able to do this on their own. One thing that Ms. Dingle mentioned was this notion of small business cyber centers. That's a really interesting concept. Where the government might invest alongside a group of small businesses to get them a common operational capability and buy from some of the big vendors. It's an interesting idea. I've never really thought about it, but it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, Ms. Dingle, I heard what you said about women's centers. I take it to heart. I consider it.
Thank you. I just wanted to address your question about whether or not you can, if it's a moving target, how do you ever try to address it? And so we answered a question about the NIST framework. You really do have to set some form of baseline, otherwise you never get there from here, because the technology is changing so frequently. As I talked about the managerial and operational components of cybersecurity, and that really boils down to, on any given day, if someone leaves your firm or you stop doing business with one of your partners, you have just introduced a new set of...
So what you're really saying is it's a continuum.
It really is.
And on that continuum, you can be at any point. And the goal is to be as advanced as you can be at any moment. And as everyone here has implied and said directly, that those people that are on the lower end of that food chain, if you will, are the ones that people go after. And along those lines, Mr. Zief, I wonder if you could explain to me, you said that someone would go into 5 companies and collect $10,000 or $15,000 apiece. How does that look? What does that look like in the real world? How would that be?
At present, that's through ransomware, which
Hope nobody's taking notes around.
at present, ransomware is the attack. I want to say du jour, but it's really been months and will continue to be so in the future. And that's effectively, are you familiar with the concept? Mm-hmm. For those that aren't, ransomware is effectively I'm locking the doors of your organization, making it impossible for you to conduct business. And and in exchange, I'm trying to extract a modest toll respective to what your company is worth. And it's my hope as the attacker that
Do people succumb to that kind of
all the time. I don't have the
extortion?
exact statistics in front of me, but I believe it's over $500 million.
I'll give you back your system if you send me X amount.
Happens all the time, and in fact, quite regularly, we see companies paying it because the amount of money that they lose just for being down for a day is dramatically eclipses the amount that they would have to pay to unlock it. Reaching out
So
to
nobody succumbs to the kill the captive thing. They always rescue the individual.
No, in fact, there's been a development recently where it's getting kind of ugly. You have competing organizations out there, generally criminal in nature, affiliated with traditional organized crime, 85% plus, who are using tools that aren't necessarily, they're copies of a copy sometimes. And so their intent may be to release you after you've paid the ransom, but the practical effect is that they weren't very good at what they were doing, and therefore, even though you've paid the ransom, they're unable to unlock you. It creates some uncertainty in the marketplace of cyber criminal tools, which, believe it or not, is actually a pretty professional.
And that's a wake-up call for anybody who has to pay that. That person would respond like Mr. Jeffers said. They'd go out and do what they needed to do to make sure that didn't happen again. Thank you. My time's expired. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Mr. Daly? Okay. You know, the export control system has long been criticized by exporters as being too rigorous, cumbersome, and inefficient. You know, on the other hand, some argue that the defense and foreign policy considerations should trump any commercial concerns. How do you balance these two competing forces of increasing American competitiveness and American security as it pertains to cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think it's definitely difficult, and I know there's a serious issue going on right now in terms of encryption and what encryption technology can go abroad and its effect. I think, like anything, I mean, the devil's in the details, and you have to be smart about it. You have to look at what's happening out there in the market internationally and say, are U.S. companies being disadvantaged, that their technology is already being sold abroad? So I think it just means, and I know that BIS and the State Department are doing a lot to reform that system to make it not only commercially appropriate, but also ensuring that it protects national security. So I think it's just keeping that focus and making sure we're not disadvantaging companies where commercial technology is already available, readily available outside, but making sure we guard the crown jewels of U.S. national security in terms of encryption technologies, and that just means being smart.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Dingell, the implementation costs for IT security is a paramount concern. These costs cause smaller institutions to lose or even decide not to compete for bids against larger companies for federal and state government bids. In your estimation, what are the steps that can be taken to ensure that small businesses do not have to choose between security and their bottom line?
Thank you for the opportunity to testify and to answer the question for you. I go back to my earlier comments about the small businesses' ability to combine forces to get either economies of scales or access to the resources that some of our larger competitors have. It can be as simple as having to buy a piece of technology that's $200 for you to purchase and use to access a federal system, or it could be as expensive as $500,000 to secure systems based on the NIST framework that I was talking about. And so anything that we can do to provide a set of resources that could be shared amongst small businesses or could be leveraged by small businesses to lower their costs and to decrease the timeline associated with implementation would be very helpful.
Thank you. And in the interest of time, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Thank you very much. The chair is very appreciative of that since we have votes called on the floor, and we have one more of our colleagues. The gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the panelists. And a couple different questions here. The first one is for really anyone that wants to jump in is, are there any telltale signs that the hack, that the action is foreign versus domestic? And, you know, what are the legal ramifications? Are they the same or might they be different? I heard earlier we certainly got the recommendation FBI as the initial entry point for the small business, but is that for both domestic and foreign? And so let me just start with that one anyways.
I'd like to address the non-legal part of that question, the attribution question, which you've raised. It's a good one, and it plays into a lot of questions, predominantly the hacking back question, which some people ask, you know, can we go after them if we know who it was? Can we affirmatively ascertain who was responsible for the attack? The answer is it depends. It depends on whether they intended for you to know who they were, whether they were very competent at what they were doing, and whether there's a reason for them to hide who they are. The ability for a sophisticated attacker to effectively mask their identity or replace it with someone else's identity, it's difficult, if not impossible, to determine whether that's the case. So if you've been attacked and all of the signs are that it was somebody from Russia, that doesn't really mean anything. You have to get in there deeper, and it's less a forensic question and more of a human question. You know, is the pattern of coding that they used, is it similar to what would be used by a Russian, or is it more likely Chinese or Eastern or Romanian or somewhere else in Eastern Europe? The ability to understand who was attacking you, very, very complicated issue.
And I think the answer to your question is the FBI does operate internationally, so they can be a starting point, but they need to work better with the intelligence community, with NSA and the like, to figure out who's connected these attacks. And in particular, we've never really, as a government, made a good case for why the NSA can help the private sector. And part of what that is, you know, we're inside of foreign government systems all the time, looking at what they're doing and trying to take their information. And one thing that we could do useful for American companies is provide some of that information back to the private sector in usable form to really protect themselves. And we don't do a very good job doing that. Information sharing is a good beginning point, but we need to do more there.
You know, the last question is really what I'm inquisitive about, not necessarily in your inbox, but given your expertise, you may very well know, what are the requirements now for small business if they win a federal contract? What requirements do they have in terms of briefings, compliance, accreditations, as it relates to cyber, and in particular dealing with potential foreign attacks?
Yeah, I think I'll defer to Mrs. Dingle on that, but you know, a lot, and they're hard.
Thank you. So the regulations that are outlined in my testimony, there are new regulations that have come about in the last 12 to 24 months that have to do with protecting unclassified information, as well as if you hold a Department of Defense contract, those things are defined in the NIST framework and in the NIST POM, and essentially you have to report any instances associated with that to the FBI. That's part of the burden that the small businesses are encountering, because they have to put a number of tools, techniques, and processes in place to enable them to be able to do so.
And I thank you, ma'am. You know, I apologize for being late. I was on the floor with our mental health bill. I don't seem to have your testimony. Maybe I can get that from staff in a little bit. I do have Mr. Jaffer's testimony, and perhaps they're just all out, you know, given the fact that I came late. But so, no, I do appreciate that input. I can imagine for small business, it's very daunting. So many things, so many balls to keep in the air, to juggle, and then the prospect, the possibility of being hacked. And then, you know, first of all, what that means for them, and then also what that means for them in terms of their requirements. So I appreciate you putting attention to that, and I look forward to reading that. Mr. Chairman, thank you for this hearing, and I appreciate it. Now yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. We want to thank the very distinguished panelists this afternoon. Your testimony was excellent. Your answers, responses to questions, very, very good. I think it's been very informative for members on both sides here. I think, Ms. Dingle, what you said about 60% of the small businesses, after being attacked, go out of business within 6 months is particularly disturbing for those of us on this committee who are doing everything we can to make America, a great place for a small business to be successful. So thank you, all of you, for providing that information. I would ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
To keep America great.